Let's talk about living forever. Death and the fear of it is probably the beginning of all of our motivation. The Stoics argue this, religious people argue this, and we could kind of intuitively feel that that is something that's always going to be present. And being aware of this can obviously help us live a more meaningful life. YOLO. I think all of these philosophies almost always start with accepting at least some part of impermanence as a method of living a more happier and a more satisfied life. I do feel like all of this is true. But that being said though, for the last couple of decades and years, there's been some really interesting people in the biohacking community that have made some very prominent gains. And a lot of interesting and great ideas are being produced from them. So is it really possible to have it all? That's what I'm going to try to unpack in this video. When I say the biohacking community, I'm talking about people like Attia, Bryan Johnson. These people are obsessed with applying the science of longevity and pushing the boundaries of what it means to have a healthy life. For me, beyond the technical tools, I think studying the way that those two people approach their lives has been a lot more meaningful to me. The way Attia talks about youth and longevity is so valuable. Rather than just selling the idea of youth and supplements and diet or whatever, he approaches it with a very important question. What do you want to be able to do in your marginal decade? To me, that's a really good framework because it acknowledges that the things will eventually change and fade and end, really. Before I talk about the ideas that he discusses in his book, I want to talk about the way that I don't want to approach when it comes to the biohacking community. Let's dig right in.
This one is metformin. This is given typically to diabetics. It's been also taken off-label for longevity purposes. The people who I admired the most did things typically over a multi-decade time frame. People who in their time and place, they survey the landscape of things that they can do, and they identify the thing that can barely be seen and say, I'm going to try to do that thing.
I respect the way he's talking about everything.
Yeah, good. Here comes the scary pictures. I started Braintree when I was
Damn, that hair kind of fire though. Those braids?
27 years old. I bootstrapped the company for the first 4 years. And we were profitable every month. And then I raised money and we sold it for 800 million. And then I made 300 million of that. At the age of 34, I thought it's time to try to do something meaningful on that kind of multi-decade timescale.
Easy money.
My objective with Blueprint is to demonstrate.
It looks like he's one of those shopping things, those mannequins. You know what I'm talking about? The wax mannequins? He looks waxy, bro. Like, he looks waxy.
Aging escape velocity. Appropriate interventions to neutralize my aging process. 1.8, so even better than last time. So I think my first one was 3.4. A few things have distinguished what I've done to date. As far as I know, I'm the only person that has publicly posted my data. It's really a stacked process of maybe 100 different things I do. You have to really think about it from a holistic perspective. So it's...
That food looks like shit. Like, it looks like actual shit that I take. Bro's lean though. Bro got on the Professor
No matter
X.
how extreme I've had to be, no matter how eccentric people perceive me to be, because I'm outside the norms, demonstrating that age can be arrested would change everything.
I think that's pretty valid. It looks kind of cool, to be honest with you. I respect it. I know a lot of people criticize him for this, but I personally think it's actually really a great service to humanity. I don't want to spend all of my waking hours optimizing and tracking for longevity. To me, that feels like I'm almost in a hospital bed all the time. Nor do I want to risk taking protocols that are not necessarily studied in a mass scale. Not to say that his methods don't work, because clearly his results show that it does work. But I don't want to be an experiment in many ways. The thing that I most appreciate about this method Bryan talks about is that he uses something called the Zeroth Principle. We all start with the premise of eliminating what is impossible. I believe that's called the first principle way of thinking. The idea behind first principle thinking is that you basically eliminate all the improbable things and only focus on the probable thing and try to optimize and live according to that. The idea that Bryan is using here is called Zeroth Principle, which is basically trying to eliminate everything that's deemed impossible and try to make it possible. Here's a clip of him talking about the Zeroth Principle in the Fridman podcast.
Yeah, life constraints favor first principles thinking, enables faster action with higher probability of success. Pursuing Zeroth Principle is expensive and uncertain. Zeroth Principle thinking should be a staple of our shared cognitive infrastructure.
But I want to say the reason why I love this approach so much is that, first of all, it's a free protocol that he puts out online. Is everything affordable and approachable for most people? Certainly not. But it's something that we could all strive for. And to me, I think there's beauty in that. And do I want to do everything in that protocol? Certainly not. Like, I'm not trying to transfuse my blood with my kids or whatever. Maybe. But you never know. Maybe it becomes a very commonplace occurrence. I checked out his website, and his website is actually incredible. He talks about his strength markers and strength numbers in a super detailed way. He gives really good explanation of what his blood markers are, which I feel like most people don't even know how to read. Having that as a free education guide is super helpful to begin with. He talks about the food that he eats with really good details. I'm talking breakfast, what time, what ingredients, everything. He doesn't really sell anything. He'll tell you what type of supplements he takes, but all those supplements can be found outside, anywhere really. It's really not something that most of us could ever afford. At the very least, we could understand better that the things we do, like whether it's drinking alcohol or smoking, occasionally eating those Snicker bars, how that debt is paid off in the future. Good to have a sense of that consequence, in my opinion. As someone that loves science, I think this is a great thing. I love when people do N of 1 experiments on themselves without using risky protocols. It does get criticized quite a bit in the comment section of most people's reaction videos. I think there's two different reasons why that is. I think one main thing is that when I watch this, it makes me feel like I'm not doing enough in my own life. Whenever I eat that 5th serving of the 85% dark chocolate, that thing is so good, bro. I'm munching. It makes me feel like I'm constantly not doing enough. That comparison with him makes me want to pull him down in some sense. Another main thing, this takes a lot of privilege to follow. I think for the most part, people that are working 9-to-5 jobs, with night shifts, with kids, other responsibilities, this is pretty much impossible to follow. It's a stark reminder of how being rich also probably means you live longer. It's just a tragic part of life where you pretty much buy way more time if you have just a little bit more money. Hopefully that means a systematic change is placed so that other people could also prioritize well-being and happiness rather than it being just accessible for people that are rich. That being said though, if we all had his access to resources, even if we didn't have to work 9-to-5, do you think we'd be doing this? Taking 150 pills, 1 meal at breakfast, sleeping at 8 every day? Would we really do this? I don't know. What makes him so motivated to do this? Most people will just say, now I want to talk about this other interesting side of longevity and lifespan science, which is surgery, Lookism, and Natty or not. Quickest growing industries in our modern world is our cosmetic surgery industry. Botox, facelifts, BBLs, even height surgery. I'm a short king myself, literally life-threatening. Men's health space, substance use for looking more vital is very common. Many men use TRT, growth hormones, peptides, lots of steroids. And I love the channel More Plates for Dates. I feel like he's just so good at just exposing people in the most polite way ever. And I just love that energy about him. In many ways though, I do understand the need for us to use these substances, get the surgery, because it really does improve the standard of living by a lot. In fact, I recently saw this Korean webtoon called Lookism. It's a great showcase of how looking good could pretty much change our lives entirely. I think though that the difference here is that using PEDs don't always lead to a better health outcome long term. It might be a good short-term impact, but long term it's kind of untested. Things like Botox might look good for a couple of years. Years down the line, it might look like your face is paralyzed. You might take growth hormones and you might look great and feel great for 4 to 5 years. And like 50 years from now, your balls might shrink. While I understand why people do those things, I think we need to approach it in a different way. And that is the method that Peter Attia talks about, which I will eventually get to, I promise. But before that, there's this one channel named Quaves that actually explains how much like really subtle things actually matters when it comes to our looks. Things like symmetry, our eyebrow, cheeks, leanness, our fashion sense, haircuts. Tries to break everything down the most scientific way possible. And it's really fun to watch. And it usually talks about the pros and cons of everything. I prefer this type of breakdown way more than encouraging just outright plastic surgery. I really enjoy how the channel talks about being healthy can actually just indicate good looks as well. Like you having great skin probably indicates great immune health and great blood work or whatever. You being lean indicates that you fit enough to reproduce, I guess, whatever it might be. Of course, it's still promoting lookism to an extent, but gives people more sense of control. I really appreciate that about that channel. Very least, it prevents people from taking extreme drugs, harmful peptides for weight loss. Doing simpler things and focusing on the basics, like improving your fashion and skincare, goes a long way, is what the channel argues for the most part. It doesn't really promote breaking your legs so you could grow taller, for example. That being said, that brings me to why I like Peter Attia so much. I especially like his journey and his mindset in approaching the longevity, health span, and lifespan problem. This type of standard being embraced probably gives the best possible balance between embracing and living your life while also optimizing. Peter Attia talks about aging and health with the idea of the marginal decade. The idea is the amount we want to optimize should always be based on what your last 10 years of living will look like. How do we best prepare for that? What are we going to give up? Those are the million-dollar questions. And yes, it's possible to live a little bit longer, but more importantly, it's possible to live a good life with those 10 years. He says this is what it means to square the longevity curve.
Red one is where we want to be. Not just because you're living longer, but because you're spending a far narrower fraction of your life in the final stages of decline. This is what it means to square the longevity curve. In an ideal world, that red curve would be a straight line here that would drop vertically and instantaneously at the end of a person's life. This is a malleable process. Now, it's not going to be malleable based on one pill, one magic workout, one fruit smoothie shake, or any such elixir. It's going to come down to a lot of hard work, a lot of understanding, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of strategy. And while such a longevity curve represents a theoretical aspiration that can probably never be attained, it serves as a model for what we can aspire to.
There are a lot of arguments on how to do this. A lot of scams, a lot of scam drugs, a lot of protocol. There's like fasting or keto or NMR or whatever the drugs that people promote are. And the truth is, a lot of it just comes down to really good genetics. Peter talks about how there are people that live well above 120 with good life. And honestly, they do the worst things for their health. They smoke a lot, they drink a lot, they eat a lot of saturated fat, whatever it might be. And they still live that long because they have really good genetic markers. The predictors of aging still seems to be about the same. Given all those variables of genetics and scamming and whatever it might be, it's really hard to tell what to do. That being said though, there's some things that are almost always 100% true according to Attia. The main prescription that almost nobody disagrees with is just doing some form of exercise. That really begins the longevity decathlon. There are many options when it comes to nutrition, but we could all agree that we can't skip out on some form of strength training and heart training. Look at this clip.
Having very high cardiorespiratory fitness, so having a VO2 max that is elite, we would define that as the top 2.5% of the population, compared to below average, is a 5-fold reduction in all-cause mortality. Wow. Death from any kind.
Strength training, Peter really emphasizes things like grip, step-ups, pound lifts like squats, really strong hip flexibility and mobility. This kind of stuff prevents you from sarcopenia. Say you're age 55 and above and you fall down. The amount of strength and muscle you have in your body will help you recover from hip fractures or prevent hip fractures to begin with. Another thing that he emphasizes is zone training and VO2 max. There's this pyramid that he gives. Zone 2 is the foundation of the pyramid. It helps you increase the base by training that thing. And then VO2 max training or anaerobic training without oxygen is the tip of the pyramid. The wider and taller the tip is, the better your heart health. Apparently, it prevents things like insulin resistance, heart attacks, fatty liver disease, diabetes. All of this also helps improve cognition as well. I think he once gave this example. Let's say you have grandkids and you want to imagine yourself being able to squat down low and play with them, building Legos or whatever, which means you're gonna have to eventually get back up. If you want that movement to be good, you have to start working on that earlier in life. So yeah, like the more you think about those things, better prepared you can be. I think in general, what Peter does is like 220 minutes of zone 2 cardio combined with a couple of days a week of strength training. He does take it to more levels by doing like stability workouts. So he spends much more time than maybe the average person can. But if you're thinking about the marginal decade, then maybe you should also be in that same path as well. I personally do a combination of those things as well. Whether it's through gymnastics, which I love doing, dance, which I love doing, flipping, whatever it might be. Me loving those movements has basically made me optimize both my nutrition and my exercise routine. It feels like I'm always building to something. It doesn't feel like I'm just doing it to live longer. I want to be able to do these things when I'm a little bit older. That means I will work backwards from there. How fast do I push a squat max? Fast enough that I improve, but not so fast I get injured when I'm 60. That's kind of how I have to start looking at things. I haven't finished his book yet, but in his book, he also really emphasizes things like emotional and mental well-being. He gave a very personal account that I don't want to just discount in this video, but please check that out if you want to. He did a lot of therapy work for his anger, for his management of workaholism. So this approach is very holistic, and I really appreciate that. That being said though, the prime example that I could find of what it means to be a healthy 100-year-old person for me was Mike Fremont. He's doing marathons at age 100. He's like the only person ever. I think he's like 101 now. Basically has the fastest recorded time for a marathon at that age, by the process of elimination. I love this ritual podcast that he did.
How are you doing? Like, how do you feel? What is it like to be 100?
These, believe it or not, are the very best years of my life. Things that I've worked for and worked on have blossomed out. I'm still here. I can still run, so to speak. For my age, I'm practically number one.
Yeah. by sheer process of elimination.
A lot of it might still come down to genetics. It's crazy to me how much our choices can also impact our lifespan. When I look at Fremont talk, he seems to emanate this sense of like joy and like childish curiosity, something really like cute about him. I don't know how to explain it. Running a marathon isn't easy for a 20-year-old, but as a 100-year-old, that's crazy. The great thing is that he wants to keep doing it. He enjoys it. He's not like burning himself up over it. How did he manage all this? I also saw a video of him doing pull-ups age 101. Clearly doing something correct. This is what I wanted to understand truly. What makes Bryan Johnson, Mike Fremont, and Peter Attia different? What makes them similar? I think that really does come down to the sense of meaning that you might have. Book Man's Search for Meaning is often touted as one of the most important books in understanding the aftermath of World War II and the atrocities that were committed during that time. And oftentimes, Frankl works backwards, finding the meaning, finding the why to bear all the suffering that was inflicted on him. It seems like that's kind of the approach both Bryan Johnson and Peter Attia are taking to some extent. To them, it's meaningful to answer these questions, so they're willing to go very extreme lengths to do those things. That being said though, I don't necessarily think Fremont is actually operating the same exact way. It doesn't seem to me like he thought about 100 years from now when he was 70. It seems like he was just trying to optimize for the present sense of joy in his life. So he only did the basics. He didn't do like 100 supplements, experiment with like continuous glucose tracker, or eat the perfect diet. He became like plant-based at age 70. He's fairly old, but started with the basics of finding joy in things. He has really good family relations. He has good community. He found a movement practice that he truly liked, running. He also really seems to enjoy eating the way he does. Makes him fulfilled. Basically, he found meaning in the moment to moment. It's a little bit different from what most people think about when they say finding the why. For me, when I look at him, it seems like he really figured out a way to find joy in this moment right here. And somehow that made him live longer. Find a sustainable practice, make you feel a sense of connection and joy and happiness. So yeah, is it possible to live forever? Maybe. But how do you want to live that life? That boils down to this moment right now. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, I never want to bash down anyone in these videos. Just trying to see things from different people's perspective and see what I resonate with the most. To me, in some sense, Mike Fremont is my hero. But I also love Bryan Johnson and I also love Peter Attia. And I think what they're doing is tremendously helpful. I hope that approach also helps you and makes you think about how you want to continue living. Like, comment, subscribe. You are my friends.